picture this for a second. You're walking barefoot on a patch of grass in the early morning.
Oh, yeah. The really wet, freezing kind of
Oh,
grass.
exactly. The ground is still slick with dew, and it is just startlingly, aggressively cold. Now,
Yeah.
think about what your body instinctively wants to do in that exact moment. You clench.
Right, your whole body braces.
Yeah, you hike your shoulders up toward your ears, your breathing gets super shallow, and your entire kinetic chain just it braces against the sensation. And in that state of contraction, the cold feels incredibly harsh.
It feels almost like an assault.
Yeah.
Like the environment is actively attacking you.
Yes. But consider what happens if you consciously intervene. Like if you take a slow breath, you soften your shoulders, drop your weight, and you just let the cold be cold. You let your feet just be feet.
Which is so hard to do, but it changes everything.
It really does. Almost instantly, that exact same physical sensation transforms. It stops being an assault, and it actually becomes grounding. It becomes clarifying, even, medicinal.
Yeah.
And the wild thing is, the physical reality of the grass didn't change at all. The ambient temperature didn't change. The only variable in that entire complex equation was you.
That is just such a phenomenal encapsulation of the human experience. I mean, we dedicate an astonishing amount of our life's energy to trying to manually change the temperature of the grass.
Oh, right. Trying to control everything outside of us.
Exactly. Trying to control the external environment rather than taking a hard look at our own clenched jaw or our own internal bracing.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are taking a deep dive today into the actual mechanics of our own suffering. Our central text for this exploration is a rather profound piece titled, "Nature Only Hurts If One Resists," and the subtitle is, "The Reflection Comes From Within."
It's a brilliant piece of writing.
It really is. But to really decode this, we aren't just looking at one philosophical essay. We've pulled together a whole stack of sources. We've got clinical research on somatic processing, journals on materials, science, and physics, and texts exploring indigenous ecological philosophies.
A pretty wide net.
Yeah, but our mission today is to synthesize all of this to understand a deeply radical premise. The idea that a massive percentage of our physical and emotional pain is actually just the body reporting on its own opposition to what is happening.
And to do this justice, we really have to look past the metaphor. You'll notice my visual backdrop has shifted to a quiet, misty forest canopy today.
Oh, yeah, I see that. It looks very zen.
Well, that's because we are moving out of the realm of abstract self-help and diving right into the biomechanics of how we move through the natural world. This collection of sources fundamentally challenges how we conceptualize survival, how we process sensory input, and what it physically costs us to be in a state of perpetual resistance.
I love that our sources explicitly ground this in physics, noting that physics simply doesn't lie. So let's take that barefoot on the grass scenario and apply some hard science to it. How does resistance actually manufacture pain on a strict mechanical level?
So we have to consult trebology.
Tribology.
Yeah, trebology. It's the specialized field of material science that studies friction, wear, and lubrication. We sort of colloquially think of friction as just, two things rubbing against each other.
Like rubbing your hands together to get warm.
Right. But scientifically, friction is the force that resists the relative motion of solid surfaces, fluid layers, and material elements sliding against each other. It is fundamentally a function of resistance.
Okay, tracking with you so far.
When an object resists the lateral movement of another force, it takes that kinetic energy and it has to convert it into something else. It converts into the thermal energy, heat.
Which causes wear and tear.
Exactly. It creates micro tears, it creates structural damage, it creates tangible harm.
That becomes incredibly visceral when you look at fluid dynamics, particularly swimming. Like when you dive into a pool and you achieve hydrodynamic alignment.
Streamlining your body.
Yeah, streamlining, moving with the physics of the water. When you do that, there is very little friction. You experience glide. But the moment you tense up, lose your form, and start thrashing against the water, you generate massive amounts of form drag.
The water suddenly feels incredibly heavy, almost solid.
Exactly. One of the articles we reviewed has this brilliant, succinct phrasing that just stuck with me. Drag is resistance made physical.
What's fascinating here is that we are being asked to view our own subjective experience of pain through that exact same mechanical lens. In this framework, pain is not some cosmic punishment. It isn't bad luck.
It's just biology.
Right. It is simply your biology reporting on the presence of internal friction. It is the drag. When an impact hits you and you are in a clenched, contracted state, the resulting pain is not metaphorical. It is the literal mechanical reality of friction happening inside your tissues because you are resisting the kinetic energy of the experience.
Which completely flips the paradigm of how we treat discomfort. Because if we follow this logic, it implies that the incoming stimulus, like a freezing temperature, a rough texture, or even a deeply painful memory, isn't inherently the source of the suffering. The thing that hurts isn't actually the thing that hurts.
That is the crucial distinction our sources make. When any afferent signal, meaning sensory information traveling from your nerve endings to your brain, enters your field, your nervous system arrives at a microsecond choice point.
A literal fork in the road.
Exactly. It has two options. It can receive the signal, process it, and let it pass through the system. Or it can perceive it as a threat and brace against it.
Wait, so if a freezing temperature or like a painful memory enters your field, the text is saying the sensation itself isn't the problem.
Right. The original signal was just information. But for a myriad of evolutionary reasons, our default setting is usually to brace. We tense up thinking it will create a shield.
Which makes sense, right? We want to protect ourselves.
It makes evolutionary sense, sure. But the biomechanics prove that bracing achieves the exact opposite. By tensing your musculature and contracting your fascia, you are biologically increasing what the literature calls your surface area of resistance.
Oh, wow. And as tribology just taught us, increasing the surface area of resistance exponentially increases the force of friction.
Exactly. By attempting to block the sensation, you radically amplify your subjective experience of the impact. You end up feeling the resistance stacked on top of the original sensation until it's completely distorted.
So the attempt to feel less actually guarantees you feel more.
Yes. The tension layers over the sensation until the original piece of sensory data is completely buried. At that point, the intense pain you are experiencing is mostly just the pain of your own neuromuscular tension.
The cold water plunge is the ultimate stress test for this mechanism. I mean, anyone who has ever attempted an ice bath or jumped into a freezing lake knows this physiological loop intimately.
Oh, definitely.
If you inch into the water, hunching your back, restricting your breathing to these little shallow gasps, treating the water as if it is actively trying to destroy you, the experience is genuinely agonizing.
It is agonizing because of what is happening in your vascular system. Your sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight center, reads the sudden drop in temperature as a lethal threat.
It thinks you're dying.
Pretty much. It immediately triggers a massive release of adrenaline and cortisol. Your blood vessels undergo intense vasoconstriction, clamping down to keep blood in your core. Your muscles tighten involuntarily to generate heat.
Creating all that internal drag.
Exactly. This massive internal friction and restricted blood flow ironically prevents the cold from moving through your tissues efficiently. You actually feel significantly colder, which then sends a secondary panic signal to the brain, confirming that you are indeed under attack, and the threat loop seals itself shut.
You essentially manufacture your own internal suffering. But look at the physiological alternative, surrendering to the cold water. And it's important to clarify here that none of our sources suggests surrendering means you enjoy it.
Right. It isn't a day at the spa.
No, it remains a shocking thermal event. But if you yield, if you override the panic and intentionally slow your breathing to signal safety to your body, a completely different biological process takes over. The parasympathetic nervous system engages.
Your blood vessels dilate.
Exactly. The body metabolizes the thermal sensation rather than hoarding it. The cold wakes up your circulation, floods your brain with endorphins and dopamine, and then the shock simply passes. The duration of the acute suffering drops from minutes to mere seconds.
Because the chemical composition and temperature of the water never changed. Your hydrodynamic relationship to the water changed. You just stopped fighting the current.
If we extrapolate this, if our nervous system's internal resistance is the primary dictator of the intensity and duration of our suffering, that completely rewires how we should view the external world. It shifts the entire premise of our relationship with nature.
It forces a massive shift, yeah. This is where our primary text really bridges the hard science with a deep theological and ecological philosophy. It posits that the environment, what some traditions refer to as the living system or the body of the mother, is fundamentally a non-punitive system.
Meaning it's not out to get us.
Right. The biosphere does not have an agenda of punishment. It does not target humans for retribution, and it does not organize its weather patterns or its physics around our personal suffering.
It functions entirely as a reactive feedback loop, like a mirror.
Precisely. The ecosystem simply responds to the structural shape you introduce to it. If you introduce a contracted, rigid, fearful shape into a dynamic fluid system, you get the experience of contraction amplified and reflected back as blunt force.
But if you open up,
If you bring a shape of openness and permeability, you yield flow. You integrate into the system rather than declaring war on it.
The reflection comes from within. That is the subtitle of the core text, and it points out that numerous indigenous and historical wisdom traditions mapped this out centuries before we had the vocabulary of neurobiology. The Taoist concept of Wu Wei is a perfect example.
Yeah, Wu Wei is frequently, and honestly, somewhat poorly, translated into English as inaction or passive yielding.
Which makes it sound like you just give up.
Exactly, which isn't it at all. Historical texts show it means something much closer to effortless action, or moving with the current. It is the philosophy of water. Water doesn't fight the boulder in the stream. It yields to the shape of the rock, moves around it, and over time carves out a canyon.
It's the application of maximum leverage with minimum drag. And we also see this in indigenous knowledge systems, right? Walking on the land is taught not as an act of conquest, but as a dialogue. You step lightly, you move dynamically with the terrain. But engaging in that kind of ecological dialogue requires you to show up without armor.
Yes, the armor is a barrier to that connection.
But wait, I want to dig into that concept of armor because this is where the logic gets challenging. Culturally, we revere armor. We are taught to build emotional armor, financial armor, intellectual armor to protect ourselves from a harsh world. Armor is supposed to make us strong. Why does the author say armor is the problem?
It is entirely unsustainable. This is the core paradox of the human defense mechanism that the text highlights. Armor gives you the illusion of strength, which is deeply seductive.
Right.
But look at the functional reality of armor. Its baseline assumption, its very reason for existing, is that the world is a battlefield.
Right.
Therefore, a nervous system encased in armor treats every single incoming sensation as a potential hostile attack.
So the filter itself becomes the problem.
The filter becomes the source of the trauma. If your biological baseline assumes everything is a threat, then everything that makes contact with you registers as a concussive blow.
Because it's hitting metal.
Exactly. The very defense mechanism you constructed to protect against pain becomes the primary engine generating it. You lose the capacity to feel the nuance of a gentle breeze or the warmth of the sun because all of that subtle data is blocked. All you can feel is the heavy, suffocating hot metal of your own defenses pressing into your skin.
That is a staggering realization, and it bridges us to what is undoubtedly the most difficult application of this entire deep dive. It is one thing to sit here and philosophize about surrendering to a cold plunge or finding hydrodynamic flow in a swimming pool, but what happens when the incoming sensation isn't just physical discomfort, but genuine devastation?
You are bringing us to the mechanics of grief.
Here's where it gets really interesting and where listeners are justifiably going to have some skepticism because a purely physical model of drag doesn't seem to account for the staggering weight of a life-altering loss. People are going to say, loss is real. I didn't choose to resist it. It just hurts.
And our sources do not bypass that reality for a second. The literature on somatic trauma is explicit. The initial impact of profound loss is a massive, highly disruptive physiological event. It is a real blow to the system.
No one is denying the initial pain.
Not at all. The critical divergence, the exact moment where our agency enters the equation, is what the nervous system does in the milliseconds, days, and years after that initial impact.
The processing phase.
The metabolism phase. Because grief that is met with presence, grief that is allowed to move and be fully felt, follows a biological life cycle. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The body metabolizes the neurochemicals. The cortisol flushes out. The adrenaline dissipates.
And the pain doesn't magically vanish into some state of toxic positivity, right?
No, but it fundamentally changes form. It transforms into depth, into knowledge, and into the enduring texture of having loved someone or something deeply.
But the alternative, the clinical data on the alternative is incredibly dark. Grief that is fought, suppressed, or wrapped in a looping cognitive story of unfairness, it doesn't just sit there benignly. It calcifies. It becomes a permanent physical structure inside the body.
If you look at the concept of allostatic load, which is the cumulative of wear and tear on the biological systems from chronic stress, it perfectly explains this. When you resist a massive emotional wave, you are requiring your muscles to stay chronically tense to serve as a dam. You keep your sympathetic nervous system perpetually engaged.
So you're just burning fuel constantly.
Yes. The stress chemicals pool in your tissues. This is why individuals who have been running from unprocessed grief for decades are so fundamentally deeply exhausted.
It's not a lack of sleep, it's an energy deficit.
Exactly. They are exhausted not from the original loss, but from the massive, relentless metabolic cost of keeping the memory of that loss locked in place. They're spending all their available cellular energy maintaining the armor.
Which is such a profound tragedy because, as our somatic research points out, your biology is desperately trying to heal you. Every single cell in your body is programmed to process information and return to baseline. You are literally built to metabolize.
The acute suffering is no longer originating from the historical event itself. It is being continuously generated by the resistance apparatus. It is the cognitive mind deciding it knows better than the wisdom of the physical body, holding the entire system hostage, because it's terrified that if it allows the grief to actually flow, the system will be annihilated.
Which brings up the most vital question. If our underlying biology knows exactly how to heal, what is overriding it? Why do we choose to keep grief calcified? Why do we insist on carrying the armor?
We carry it because we are fiercely protecting a story.
Yes, we aren't actually protecting our biological bodies. Our bodies want to release the tension. We are protecting an adapted self-concept. It makes me think about a smoke alarm. A smoke alarm's sole function is to alert you to a lethal threat, like a house fire. But if your alarm is miswired to scream at top volume every time you use a harmless toaster, it's maladaptive.
That's a great analogy.
The toaster is benign, but the alarm system is flooding your house with panic as if you are about to burn to death.
That tracks perfectly with the concept of hypervigilance. The texts on somatic therapy explain that these perceived triggers we constantly armor up against, these benign toasters, are usually just somatic sensations that got tagged as fatal threats when we were young and helpless.
So the tag stayed even though we grew up.
Exactly. Perhaps you lack the agency or the support to properly metabolize a terrifying experience back then. So decades later, your nervous system treats basic, entirely manageable data like a moment of unfamiliar vulnerability or a sudden silence as an extinction event. The terror is locked in your physiology, not in the external stimulus.
Which perfectly maps out the architecture for doing the actual somatic work to untangle this. It's not about fixing a broken body, because the body isn't broken. It's about providing enough safety and curiosity so the body can finish what it started. It needs to complete the circuit.
Completing the circuit is the ultimate goal. When you approach a painful sensation with genuine, grounded curiosity, asking things like, what is the actual physical texture of this? Where exactly does it live in my chest? It begins to shift.
Because unreceived information just keeps getting louder. It will scream to force you to pay attention. But once the nervous system finally receives the information, the loop closes. It completes its message and it stops broadcasting. The smoke alarm shuts off.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of our deep dive, it radically alters how we view discomfort. Nature, the ecosystem, your physical sensations, they are not trying to hurt you. Nature is just offering a coordinate. Every time you experience that disproportionate spike of pain, it is like a map pointing directly to where you're holding on to old armor.
So, what does this all mean for you as you're listening to this right now? It means that the drag, the friction, the overwhelming exhaustion, it lives on your side of the encounter. But, and please hear this clearly, not because you are broken,
Not at all.
but because you are a remarkably smart biological organism that reasonably learned to protect itself in a world that was sometimes genuinely unsafe. Your armor was a brilliant, necessary survival response.
It kept you safe when you needed it most. But the synthesis of all our sources today leaves us with a lingering question. Does this hypervigilant protection still make sense now? Or is the armor costing you significantly more than the phantom threat it was built to prevent?
And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. If the science holds true, if the act of resistance is the very mechanism that turns a raw sensation into unbearable pain, what happens when you finally decide to drop the armor? If you walk back out onto that wet, freezing grass and you finally stop racing, is it possible that the very sensation you have spent your entire life aggressively running from might actually contain the exact energy, clarity, or profound joy you have been desperately searching for?
You just have to let the cold be cold.
And let your feet be feet. Until next time.